you have to be a little dumb or a little
For
naive, I
sure.
think, at the start of throwing yourself into this business. And I think it goes a long way. I think it's more helpful than not usually.
I'm Charla Lariston. I've been a TV writer for almost a decade, but it wasn't that long ago that quitting my day job and moving to Hollywood was nothing but a pipe dream. After lots of failures, many mistakes, and many lessons learned, I've now written for 7 TV shows, 2 features, and sold 3 TV pilots. I've done all this through imposter syndrome, burnout, and with zero roadmap. On the Working Writer podcast, I pull back the curtain on breaking in and teach screenwriters and creatives how to thrive both personally and professionally. Without further ado, let's get to work. What's up, party people? Welcome to another episode of the Working Writer Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me once again. I've got Dickson on the show today. She's another former showrunner of mine from the show Hoops on Netflix, which was an animated show. And because she's a former showrunner of mine, it makes me feel like I'm doing a little bit of a showrunner series on this show right now, since last week I had Phil Augusta Jackson, who was my showrunner on Grand Crew, also on the show. So I think this is good. I think we're checking out the showrunners. I think we're getting a sense of how to be a showrunner, how they pick writers, what their trajectories are, which is awesome. Has also written for Enchanted and How I Met Your Father. She's had a really wonderful career. She sells shows all the time. She's pitching all the time. She's developing all the time. She was my first lady showrunner, which is another story for another day. I think I was in like 6 writers' rooms before I ever had a lady showrunner. So I was like, oh my God. But she was fantastic, and she continues to be a mentor of mine to this day. I'm excited for you to check out this episode and hear M's story. Here's my episode with Dickson. Dickson, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Before we get to you being one of my favorite showrunners, I have a series of questions that I ask everyone that comes on this show, just so we get some background information about you. And it usually starts with, where are you from? So please tell everyone where you're from and what your cultural background is.
My cultural background? Well, I'm from New Jersey, so I think that is cultural background. I think
That is culture.
I
Yeah.
think New Jersey is its own culture. Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, I think you're Italian. I love how you're completely omitting that. Are you?
I mean,
What's
yes,
Dickson? What's
I'm
that
loose.
last name?
Dickson, actually, Dickson, which is how my last name is spelled, is apparently Russian, but Dixon
Interesting.
is English. I don't really know. My dad's dad went out for a beer when my dad was 12 and didn't come home, so we're a little
Oh
unclear
wow.
on the genealogy on that side. My mother's side is very, very, very Italian. My dad, like, I think loosely identifies as like Irish and a mix
Oh
because his
wow.
mom was pretty Irish. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. That little nugget you dropped in about your dad's dad was something that I could really go deep on, but let's just focus on the TV
I mean,
stuff
you and a lot of
today.
people probably. There's a lot there to unpack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love how you dropped that in. That's a great story. So you're from New Jersey. Did you go to college? What was your background like after high school, I guess?
No, the town that I grew up in New Jersey was about an hour south of New York. So I was just sort of obsessed all through high school with just getting to New York. That felt like a thing. So I
Interesting.
didn't had very little interest in college. And I feel like there's a point in high school where you need to really decide if you're going to college or not. And I, for better or worse, really leaned into not going. So I think even if I had changed my mind by senior year, I probably had leaned far enough away that I wasn't really going. Um, I really wanted to move to New York. A lot of my friends were moving to New York, and I kind of just thought I was gonna go and do that. My mother was like, "No, you're gonna find a school to go to. I don't really care what kind of school it is, but you have to be in some sort of structure." So I ended up finding I was really interested in writing, obviously, and directing and all sorts of that side of things. So I ended up going to at the time it was called the School for Film and Television. I think now it's the New York Conservatory of something. They've like upped their title to something fancier.
Their name game. They
But
up their name game.
yeah, they upped their name game. They got like a
Yeah.
swankier logo, I think. And
Cool.
I started there and I didn't last very long. I went for a few months and then I think I had sort of satisfied my mother's um, quota for, or like I had sort of done, I've gotten into the city the way that she wanted me to, and then I ended up sort of doing what I wanted anyway, and living with friends and writing sketches and directing stuff.
Oh, wow. I love asking that question because uh, I think there's an assumption that every TV writer went to college. And although a lot of them did, is from my experience, I did. I'm always super interested to hear about people's trajectory and whether or not they took that, very standard route. So you end up blowing off school and not going to
Yeah.
school at all.
Yeah.
So then what did the trajectory look like after that? Like what did I know I understand you're like writing sketches and stuff, but like did you have a day job? Like what were you doing?
I had a variety of day jobs.
Okay.
I did everything from, I worked like front desk at a dental office. I was a magician's assistant for birthday parties. I helped make balloon animals on like
Oh
birthday
wow.
parties on Long Island. I was one of those obnoxious people that stood in Times Square and tried to sell comedy tickets, which ironically was one of the more lucrative jobs I had in New York.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was like a wide variety of trying to piece together income.
And did you know
And
already
that,
at that point that you were going to be trying to break into the TV industry?
I think it all felt really weird. Like I don't think I understood at all how to do that. I wanted to do it, but I don't think,
Okay.
I mean, I didn't know anybody that was in the industry. I didn't have any sense of point A to point B. And I think that had been something that was sort of frustrating me when I was at the age where I was looking at schools or colleges, was like I just wanted somebody to tell me, how do I do this thing that I want to do? And they're like, come
Okay.
study theater and learn to write a play. And I was like, that's not what I want to do. And the idea, I mean, my whole family was in New Jersey. The idea of moving to Los Angeles when I was 18 or something, I didn't know anything about that. That felt so crazy. So I think I was just trying to figure out what felt like it was on the path, but I didn't have any sense of how to do it.
That sucks. Interesting. But you knew then. So you knew. You just didn't know how to do it. You knew what you wanted to do.
Yes, I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew some of the pieces of it. Like I would watch, every kind of TV writer interview and stuff, but it was harder to find that sort of stuff then.
Yeah, for
And I
sure.
didn't know at that point. It really seemed like people were writing movies, like that was how you're supposed to get in. And I didn't really have any desire to write movies. I really wanted to write TV, and there was less information about that other than like people that I knew from sketch or improv were trying to write SNL or were trying to write late night. That was really the path in New York, but I wasn't particularly interested in that.
What did you think you were interested in?
Like writing Frasier and writing Golden Girls, like that was the kind of
I
stuff that
see.
I wanted to do, and that seemed so far away from, like, I truly just didn't know how to approach it.
All right. So what was like the turning point? What was the trajectory?
I
Like when did you
figured
actually
out
figure it out?
Well, I figured out at some point that stand up was at least the fastest way to sort of write jokes and see if they worked or not, and felt like I had some control over what I was doing. I'm also like, I like to have, sort of a project or something to push. So I liked that I had to get myself booked on shows, and I had to sort of record my sets and try, like, all of that was something that I felt like I could be in a little more of control of. Whether that was true or not, who knows? But it's certainly how it felt at the time.
Mhm.
So from doing stand up, I was just in a position a few years in where someone who was an executive at the time was at a comedy festival that I was performing at, and he sort of very offhandedly was like, I'd love to read your pilot." And I was like, "Yeah, that's definitely a thing I have." And I didn't really, I did, I had sort of lots of vague ideas and pieces of things, but I hadn't sat down and really written a pilot. Um, and I had a sort of a very short, or what I thought was a very short time frame to do it, because I was like, this guy's only going to, he's probably going to say this to 25 other people at this festival. And I want to kind of do this as quickly as possible in a way that I'm, feel good about. And I was doing a lot of stand up at the time. I was doing a lot of colleges. So I had a very sort of short window. and I really didn't know what I was doing. And a friend of mine was in LA, auditioning a lot as an actress, and we had written sketches together and things like that. And I just called her and I was like, I need to write the script. Do you want to try to write a script together? And I flew out to LA and we wrote we wrote a script in a little over a week that became honestly probably the sample that we went on to use for a very long time. But yeah, that was just somebody sort of showed me a door of like, if you write this thing, I will read it. And that was more than anyone had said to me for the last 5 years or however long. So yeah, that was like the first like real step towards it.
How did you I guess work your way through that sample if you hadn't actually written one before?
We found my friend who was auditioning a lot had a pilot that she had just auditioned for MTV. So she had the script of the pilot. And it was not a particularly great script, but we really just looked at it for formatting and looked at it for what it was supposed to be and really kind of guessed our way through it. Um, when we did eventually get to the point where other people were seeing it, like reps and stuff, of course, there were things that they were like, well, you should really add this, or this should look a little more like this. But that had really been our framework for figuring out. I mean, we didn't even know like how many pages it's supposed to be or things like that. Um, so that's what we used that pilot for.
I love that. And what I love about that is that I feel like everybody that I know that is kind of broken in, at some point in their story, you'll hear like a sense of urgency. Like when you said that this guy is going to ask all these other people, and like, there's always this sense that like you kind of have to just get past whatever the holdup is, whether it's the fear, whether it's whatever it is, whether it's the fact that you literally don't know what you're doing, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of just have to move past it. And this sense of urgency comes from knowing, having a clear idea of what you want, which is to work in the industry. I also really like that you seem to also just have like um a bias towards action, just like a let's just get it done. You got on a plane, you went and you made the pilot, whether or not it was good, um, and you got out there. It seems like that's a big part of breaking in. Can you talk about that at all? Because I think just knowing you, Em, like you're just one of those people that I just think has a bit of like a get it done kind of vibe. You have a very get it done kind of vibe. I really love how motivated you are. I feel like whenever I talk to you, you're always working on something and you're always really excited about it. Can you just talk about that a little bit? Like where do you think that comes from in as far as who you are as a professional?
Well, thank you. I was, yeah, I think it comes from different things. And I think at different points of my life and career, I think it's come from different things. I think in the beginning, I didn't go to college. I don't come from a family that was going to be able to financially really help me. I mean, my family was certainly helpful over the years, but not financially ever. It was just not, a resource they had. So I think in the beginning, when you make a decision to go into this kind of career, it has to work. You have to figure out how to make it work. So I think there was that sense of, I think fear can be a healthy motivator sometimes and a lack of a safety net and a lack of a plan B. So I think that was a lot of it in the beginning. And then I think, I really do enjoy the work. And I think that's in the beginning, I was so attached to, I just wanted to get in the rooms. I just wanted to get to the outcome or whatever that is. And then as well as I do that the the great moments are sort of few and far between in this business. So you have to really like the work because that's what you're mostly doing. Um, and I do. I still really like it. I still think there's like this like part of me that's just always going to love figuring out how to build an idea and how to put a team together and how like all of that is really fun for me. So I think that keeps me going. And I think the fact that this business is a crapshoot. I mean, there is no stability here. So it's like at some point, I don't know. Um, Carrie Fisher has a great quote about success, and she's like, there, and what success looks like in the arts. And I'm gonna mess it up, but it's basically like we never get to a point in this business where we're like, okay, I'm gonna go take a nap. I'm good. Like there's not, so I think there's always sort of you finish one job and you're like, great, am I gonna get another job? You sell a show, great, am I gonna sell another show? So there's a little bit of that, but I do think I've chilled a little over the over the years. I don't think I have that same sort of intense fear, but I also don't think I would have the career I have or any career if I didn't start with that intense fear for a while.
Absolutely. I relate to all of that, so much of that. I also came from a background where I really didn't have a lot of financial security in terms of my, getting that from family. So it really was a sense of urgency of like, this has to work and it has to work as fast as possible. And I'm going to do whatever I got to do
Yeah.
to make it happen because number one, I know I'll regret if I don't give it my best shot. And number two, if there's a way to make if it's possible for other people, then it's possible for me. Like that's how I felt. So I was just like, if other people can figure it out, I can figure it out, you know? So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think when I got to the point where I realized that, all these shows had these staffs of however many writers and all these people were selling shows, it was a little bit of like, oh, so there are spots for people, so
Hmm.
why can't I have one of the spots? And I
Yeah,
think that having that mentality in the beginning, you have to be a little dumb or a little
for
naive, I
sure.
think, at the start of throwing yourself into this business. And I think it goes a long way. I think it's more helpful than not usually.
For sure. Absolutely. Not knowing what you don't know is great
Yeah,
because then you have a lot of questions to ask. And I think the people that ask a lot of questions are the people that get the furthest. Um,
I agree.
Speaking of, I have another question for you. You mentioned um, that this business has very little security, which is something that I feel that particularly in this economy, we're in the middle of the Fed's raising interest rates. We're in the middle of just high prices everywhere. Like just this general, a lot of tech layoffs at the time of this recording. We've seen a lot of like Meta and Google and Amazon layoffs, and I feel like it's like created this sense in the air, like in the atmosphere of just, are we going to be okay? Is where do we find security? And I feel as a TV writer, I've had that sense of like like you were talking about earlier, that like yes, I sell this show, but like what's the next show? And like yes, I have this job, but what's the next job? Like, and that need to chill out about the future otherwise you'll drive yourself crazy. The need to love the work and focus on the work, because otherwise if you focus on the fact that you're in an insecure industry, you'll again drive yourself crazy. What do you do to either build security for yourself or to give yourself a sense of security?
I wish I knew. I think I think there is some security, false or not, that comes from sort of having had the ability to build a little bit of a resume, to be, with a team of reps that you feel good about, to have sort of, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of development. So there are, people I can call and say, hey, I have this idea for a show. And we get to talk about it in a way that's a little more real than I would have had the opportunity to talk about it, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So I think, building out my network has made me at least feel like I have doors to knock on if I find myself in a position without a job or without a project. I feel like I've, put in the time to build the network. In terms of, do I feel secure about where my next job is coming from? Not really, no. But I think, I've also just gotten to a point where I've been doing this for a number of years now, and I'm still here, so that gives me some sense of security that there are good years and bad years, and good months and bad months, and I like it enough to stick it out. So if there's a bad year, I'll probably stick around for another good one. I don't know. You look at people that they get this huge overall deal, and then you're like, okay, they must feel secure, but they don't, because if they're not selling enough or making enough during an overall, they could
Right.
lose that. If the guild strikes, the studios can reset their overall deals. So, I don't know, short of being, Aaron Sorkin or Shonda Rhimes, I don't know who's walking around super secure, but
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, but I also think you're kind of selling yourself short. Because I do think you're doing things to secure yourself by, developing all the time. You develop all the time. You're always coming up with ideas. You always have things to sell. Um, which is one of the things that I think is I don't know, I guess not talked about enough. When people look at TV writing and you want to be a TV writer, you just think about the writer's room, but there's many other things that you have to do. Um, as a writer, it's part of your job is to create shows. And you do that quite a bit, So I think that that's a big way that you secure yourself in terms of your professional development.
I mean that it's true in the sense that I think having a job or getting staffed is I've made it so it can be a smaller part of my year. But, at the end of the day, I can't really control whether or not these projects I develop sell or not. I mean, I can do my best and I try to, but I
Right.
think even in that there is sort of an inherent lack of security, but it does put the power back in the writer's hands a little more than just sort of throwing your script in a pile to get read by a showrunner.
Absolutely. Um, I wanted to ask you about kind of breaking in, just because I feel like when you broke in, it was different from when I broke in, and with like the advent of more technology, like the internet and now Chat GPT, it just feels like now we're on the cusp of another experience of breaking in. Like, I wonder if you could like speak to how you feel about the people who have to break in now, and if there's anything that you like, how do you even like think about it, because I think it feels harder to break in now.
Yeah, I mean it does in a lot of ways feel harder, and it's weird because I remember it was certainly after I was already working, but not long after. I remember, there was this wave of writers getting hired from Twitter, and then there was
Yeah.
sort of this like backlash. There was so there's always been some sort of new
Yeah,
thing, I think, that's sort of feeding into how people are getting staffed, but it's weird because at the same time there's more content than there's ever been,
I know. Yeah.
but it doesn't feel like it's gotten any easier to sort of get your foot in the door. And
It
I'm really I'm not sure. I was just on a show with three staff writers, and they all sort of came in really differently. And I think that's always been true, but I think I do feel like it's harder now, but I don't know if I know why I feel that way. I just think, people ask me all the time about like, how do I get a writer's assistant job? And I'm like, I have no idea. I wish I could tell
yeah.
you. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's never, for all the years that it's gone on, and for all the years I've been doing it, I've never gotten any more clear on how people break in. I think everyone has such a different story, and I've heard sort of mixed bags about, oh, I did this fellowship program, or I did this, or I did, like, everyone, there's pros and cons to sort of every way. And it's just like, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really interesting because it feels harder, but yet it feels like the same things are required that were
Hmm.
always required, which is that sense of urgency, that sense of curiosity and asking questions, that willingness to dig for information and to dig for opportunities, to be in the right place at the right time, to actually literally create work, which is what you did. You wrote that script, you were doing stand up. Like, it seems like, yeah, it's harder, but then at the same time, it's also the same because even though the world has changed around us, I think the industry, even though it has gotten a little bit more technologically advanced, it's like basically the same. It's pretty much, it just doesn't really change, it seems.
Well, and things start to catch up to themselves. It used to be kind of a novelty if somebody had a web series that a lot of people were
Yeah,
watching or had circulated, and now it's like everyone has thousands of people watching their TikToks and watching their content. So it's like now it's not enough to just make it. You have to sort of rise above, you have to like it's just yeah, everything that moves forward kind of comes in these waves where I don't know how much it's actually helping people stand out.
I can't tell either. But I don't think that it is the end of the world. I think it just gives different advantages to different people. I think that the people who know how to use social media, the people who know how to put themselves out there or package themselves in a particular way, or the people that are just like more naturally inclined to do that are just, they have a more of an advantage now. But I don't think that that's like necessarily the worst thing in the world. I think if you can figure it out, you can still figure it out essentially.
Yeah.
So I don't think
And there's more
it just
access
feels
now in a
different.
lot of ways.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
totally.
even, to go earlier in this conversation when I was talking about, using a script that my writing partner had, that was like a physical script that she had in her apartment from an audition. Now, if I wanted to find a pilot script, I could find thousands online. But so
Yeah,
there are more resources now than there were, but yeah, it's still down to the person sort of piling them correctly and having that sense of urgency and figuring out what they can specifically do.
absolutely. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to ask you about your first showrunner job and how you decide on hiring writers when you take the helm of the show. Are you ready to join hundreds of writers and creatives learning how to take their lives and careers to the next level with the Working Writer newsletter? Then go to theworkingwriter.com/join and sign up to get the Working Writer newsletter straight to your inbox. And now, on to the show. And we're back. Like I said, you were one of my favorite, and I think one of the reasons why you were my favorite is because you were the first female showrunner that I had, which is sad.
Yeah.
You and Jen, yes. It was a
I
team
have
running groups.
never had one.
Yeah, you were my first and only.
Oh, that's not true. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, that's not true. For myself, I was saying I had never had one, but I just finished a show with a my showrunners were a writing team, and it was one man and one woman, so I don't want to discredit it.
Okay. So there
But
was one
until then,
woman. Okay.
I had not had a
Yeah.
female showrunner.
Yeah, I think it's insane. I've been writing for I think 7 years at this point in rooms I've been staffing, and you were the first and only female showrunner that I've had. Um, I think the male domination of the industry is well tread and well known. But can you just talk about like what was that like becoming a showrunner for the first time and like what that felt like?
It was, I think, in the best circumstances possible, it would have been overwhelming in a lot of ways. And I think, as you well know, that was not the best circumstances possible. So there was a lot going on just internally, and there was a lot going on creatively, and there were a lot of sort of cooks in the kitchen on that show outside of the showrunner part. But I mean, it's a really sort of crazy thing to go through, to just all of a sudden be sort of put in charge in a way that you just never have been before. I had been a co-EP previously, and was given, a lot of responsibility, and had felt like, yeah, I can certainly do this. But I think there are things that you will just not be prepared for until you're actually doing it. I haven't done the showrunner program. I know the guild has one. I'm sure that it does a great job, but I think there are things that until you're actually staring down the barrel of a budget or a deadline or, an actor that doesn't want to do something or whatever it is. I think until
Mm.
you're actually in that situation, there's only so much you can pre-prepare for, and then it's sort of trial by fire.
Wow, I think there's a lot of people that become showrunners without doing the training program. So I don't know
Yeah.
how many people it catches. Yeah.
Well, and I
Um,
think unfortunately with the way that things are set up now, and I think this is something that, the guild is trying to address as we approach whatever is going to happen in May. Because of the shorter orders, because of the shorter rooms, because of the mini rooms, there are a lot of writers that are not getting to produce their episodes, or not getting sort of the hands-on experience that you really need if you want to showrun. So I was fortunate that the show that we're discussing is animated, and I was fortunate that the show that I was on just previous to it was animated, and we were given quite a bit of hands-on experience. So I think without that, I cannot imagine having showrun when I did. So I hope that people do get more experience producing their own episodes.
100%. You really do have to put on a different hat when you go from writer to kind of producer on a show. Because I think as a writer, and of course, is if you're a first year writer, you really, your only focus is really to contribute as much as possible, and that's your job. But then once you come once you get into that higher level, you really do have like more responsibility, and it's just I think it's a different hat that you kind of have to put on. It's just a little bit more serious.
Yeah, and it's a different, you're looking at things differently. You're looking at a scene differently. You're thinking about things that maybe you aren't thinking about as a staff writer. You're thinking about, you
Right.
know, what's that going to look
Production
like when we
and
shoot it? Yeah,
cost.
like how,
Yeah,
right. All of these other things um, that are certainly a factor if you're going to go show run. I mean, it should
absolutely.
even really be a factor if you're, writing your own development or things like that. It's a good time to sort of switch hats back and forth. But I think I hope that we get back to a place where people are getting more opportunities to be on set, or, in the records if it's animation, things like that.
Me too. Um, what are you looking for when you're hiring writers for a show?
I mean, I do think I know everybody says this, but I think if you get to the point where you're having a meeting, you're in pretty good shape already. I think, a lot of it is reading scripts and seeing, for me, something I always look at is, do your characters, is everybody sounding different, or is just everyone talking like the writer? Is everyone, because that's a pretty good indication to, we've moved away from spec scripts even before I think maybe when I started, there were a few showrunners that were still asking for specs, but everyone was asking for original pilots. And I don't think it's the same skill set necessarily. You can write a great pilot, but not be good at writing in someone else's voice. And I think that's really what the job is. So there's specifics like that I'm looking for. Obviously, I work in comedy, so I'm looking for funny jokes. I'm looking for, jokes I haven't seen a million times before, things like that. And then by the time somebody gets into a position where we're sitting down and talking, I'm probably just thinking, can I be in a room with you for 12 hours, or is it going to make me want to
Hmm.
pull my hair out? And it's not, everybody sort of meshes differently, and has different sort of personality types. So then you're also building a team, and you're saying like, can I see, if I already know that I hired this person, does this next person fill a gap in the room? Are those two writers too similar? So I mean, it really is looking at it as a unit, and looking at like what, if you have a great story person, okay, great, then maybe I need to really focus on finding the best joke writer, or really sort of building it out that way.
Do you think that there are, I guess, I want to use the word features, but I kind of like, I like personality traits in writers that you kind of across the board know you'd rather be in a room with, if that makes sense, if that question makes sense?
That I would rather be in a room with, or would rather not be in a room with.
Both, I guess.
Oh, what did
Yeah.
you you said rather.
Yeah, I
Um,
said rather, but if they're like, what's the ideal, in terms of like when you think about who you'd rather be in a room with and what's not the ideal?
I like people that are, I think a big part of the job is collaborating, and I like people that can hear an idea and build on it and not sort of shut it down, or are okay with having their own idea built on and aren't being really sort of precious about something and understand that it's collaborative. Um, so I think the flip of that is I don't do great with writers that come in very much like, okay, this is how we're going to do it and this is what it's going to be. And sort, I think especially in a comedy room, you watch a joke get built sometimes. You watch somebody pitch something really funny and then you watch somebody,
Totally.
tweak it funnier and
Piggyback.
funnier and funnier. Yeah, and the writers that are resistant to that, and I think you see it at either level. You see maybe a staff writer who's insecure and doesn't realize that that is how it's supposed to work, starts feeling like their joke is getting noted, or you watch
Mhm.
like an upper level writer who thinks, everything that comes out of their mouth is perfect, so they don't like seeing. And I think the sweet spot is, I think the sweet spot is in the middle, which is understanding that, the room's job is to make it funnier. And I think you can sort of suss out who might be game and who might be resistant from sort of a general vibe a lot of the times, I think.
That's so funny. I feel like you just like observe so many different minds and personalities at work in a writer's room. It's one of my favorite parts, just observing everybody.
Hmm.
Some you can have some real anal people, some real insecure people, and and I never judge anyone because I just feel like the room can be a little bit vulnerable. It's a bit of a vulnerable place. Sometimes people talk about real private things, so I really try not to judge anyone, and I've been insecure at times, and I've been protective over my jokes or precious over ideas or whatever. I think it's really a process of growth. I see a lot of people get into the room and like kind of want to be perfect as soon as they get in there. And I'm just like, if you're a staff writer, like that first year is the year where you're just going to be your worst. You're just going to,
Hmm.
for the first time be realizing this is what I'm like in front of a room of people who I respect and want them to respect me. And they're hearing all of my ideas. And there's a chance that everything I'm saying is the dumbest stuff I've ever said in my life. So it's
I
kind of
mean,
a
it's
vulnerable
so,
space.
I remember like, the first time bringing in like a draft and having to put,
Yeah.
my draft up on the screen and let a bunch of, and a
Oh
credit
my
to my,
God.
a credit to my showrunner at the time who was like, just so you know, this is going to be brutal. It's brutal for everybody. I've been doing this however many years. I don't like it any more than you're going to like it, which I,
Oh
I,
my
I
God.
appreciate though that he sort of said that because it is, you do get to a point, where you're sort of numb to it in a way, in a way that you can't imagine being when
Yeah.
you first start out. I was in a situation recently where someone was reading a script of mine in front of me because we were talking about something and
Woof.
she was like, "Oh my God, does this bother you?" And I was like, "No, I don't feel anything."
Oh,
Like
okay.
I don't feel,
I'm not
but
there
it
yet.
used to. Oh, it
I'm
used
not
to.
there
Oh
yet.
my God, like I used to be like, watching your like your
Yeah.
face for all. But yeah, it's a very, the room can be very intimidating and it's such a big switch, I think, for a lot of people who, you write alone usually, you write a script alone. If I've seen stand-ups have a very hard time adjusting to rooms because they're used to sort of this singular thing that they do, and
This
it's
kind of
it's
lone wolf
very
thing.
collaborative.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially, I mean, I've never been in a drama room, so I'm sure it's a little different, but a comedy room is, for better or worse, very collaborative. And I
Hmm.
think you have to get to a point where you figure out what your strength in that situation is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not chiming in every 5 minutes. Maybe it's, letting people hash it out and then you kind of step in because you've seen sort of the bigger picture of what everyone's talking about. Or maybe it is, that you're good on building joke. I've seen people that like maybe they don't pitch a funny joke, but they're so good at piggybacking on someone else's joke and making it funnier and building it. And then maybe that's a really good story for, everybody has a different strength. And I think part of that first year, part of being a staff writer is figuring out what is your strength. And it might not be the
Yeah.
same in every room. Every room might have a different makeup, but I think when you can figure that out about yourself, you sort of can find a confidence in the room.
I love what you just said, that your strength might not be the same in every room. I really like that. That is something that I have noticed, because different rooms kind of works differently. Different rooms work differently, and they kind of, because they work differently, will require different things of you. And there have been times, I remember there was one room where I had to do the most writing that I'd ever done individually, because it just kind of, it was like a room of upper level writers, and they really expected each writer to have a lot of control over each draft, each of their episodes. And every other room I'd worked in, it was always super collaborative from start to finish. You know, you work on everything from breaking story to the outline to the script very collaboratively. And this one was not like that. And I turned in the script that I basically had to completely write on my own with like really little direction. And it ended up being one of those kind of nightmare moments where it goes up on the computer and everybody reads it on the screen, and everybody reads it at the same time. And it just really wasn't what the showrunner was looking for. It was also like just a brutal script to write, because I just did not know what to do. I didn't really know what
Yeah,
to do.
because you weren't given
Yeah,
any guidance, or yeah.
basically, I wasn't given any guidance, and it was a page one rewrite. It was just a horrific it was a horrific experience. It was one of those, but that was the room that was right before our room. That was right before Hoops. And that experience once again was really different, because that room was much more collaborative. And when I did my script for that room, I had the experience of that horrible page one rewrite, which made me a better writer. Even though it wasn't, totally my fault that it was a page one rewrite. It just made me want to step it up and make sure that my scripts don't. I don't know. It's personal, even if it's not fully my fault. It just always feels
Oh, it's
personal
still personal.
when you
I
get
mean, it's
rewritten.
still,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's still your name on the script. And there's this thing of like, okay, well, I know that there's all these other factors, and the other writers in the room know that it's all these other factors. But then you go to the table read, and you're like, okay, did the people here know that there's all these other like things where you're just so aware. And it's still at the end of the day, that script, for better or worse, does feel like your responsibility, and especially if you're
a
getting to the
hundred
point where you're able
percent.
to produce it, and and it should, like, you want to have I'm missing the word, but you want to have a certain level of responsibility to your script. But yeah, I mean, there's scripts get rewritten for all sorts of reasons that sometimes have very little to do with the writer's intention with the first draft.
For sure. Um, I wanted to go back and touch on something that you'd talked about in the first half, which was about like how you'd mentioned something about like people not really knowing how to like network or build a network. And that's one of the things that I talk about in the Working Writer School is how to build a network, because I just think that it's such an important part of being a TV writer, because you are a freelancer. You really are an entrepreneur. You're building up your name as a business person in the industry. And I think a lot of people approach networking in this awful way. Like they approach it in this very like insane way where it's like all about like making a connection, and like they only talk about people in terms of connections, and they only talk about people in terms of what they can do for them. But what I really loved about you, Em, is that as soon as we met, we built a relationship. You know what I mean? Like we built a relationship that has continued long past the room.
Yeah.
We've gotten to know each other on a personal level, and it made me know that you're one of those people that knows how to build a network, because you're building actual relationships with people, which is what I teach that networking is about. I teach that it's about making actual building actual relationships with people and getting to know them, getting to know their story, knowing what they're good at. Um, and I guess knowing what they want so that if you need to work with them, you can help them, you can put their name out there for them if that's it. But what do you think networking is? Like how would you describe it, and how do you go about building your network?
I mean, I think you're really hitting it, which I think there's such this thing in in the industry of people that are like, okay, they're collecting people, like they're collecting I know this exec and I know that, but do you, or do you like, did you have a
Yeah.
5 minute meeting and you know their name and they know your name and they're going to have 10 other meetings today? Um, I think, yeah, I mean, I think building real relationships and I think, so many people that you come in with, chances are your next job is probably going to come from somebody you've worked with in a room. And having that be an authentic relationship and not sort of going into every room like you're trying to see who's going to hire you next, or I it's like anything else, you're not going to click with every person, you're not going to find some sort of common creative ground, or like let them find their people and you find your people. Like I think something from a development side is, execs move around a lot. You might know somebody at the studio one week and then they're, at a different network, and having real relationships that aren't built on what somebody's job title is will get you thought of a lot more and will get you a lot further than sort of just servicing this like Rolodex in your brain. So many young writers are like, can we get a coffee? Can I pick your brain? Like, sure. But if I say yes, what are you using this for? Like, what do you think is going to come out of this interaction? Like, I love to read scripts. I love to read, new writers. I like to, keep people in mind for certain things, like all of that. But that's because probably I read something of yours, I think it's good, and then I met you and I think you're like a cool person that I can sort of click with. Not because I'm like, oh, you would fill this need for me. So I,
Yeah.
I think it's just like how you approach people. I don't know. I think it's like, yeah, it's almost like I know what I don't like when I see it, more than like when it's working you don't really notice it as networking, and then you look up and you've built this network. When it's not working, or when people are making sort of insane attempts at sort of clicking in, I think that's when you're like, oh, I don't like how this feels, and this feels sort of gross and LA-ish.
100%. I think that's so interesting that like the people that actually are doing the real networking, it's not gross because if it
Right.
feels gross, then it's not networking, because what feels gross is um superficial um connections that are based off of what someone thinks you can do for them, that have no real intention, that come from nowhere of any real interest. Like, whereas the opposite of that is genuine interest in another individual and getting to know them as a person. Even if it is, of course, it's because of their work or because they are, in a particular industry. That's totally fine. But it's that it's that lack of genuine interest in the actual person that
It's
always
that thing
feels
that
really
just feels
gross.
like box checking. Like you're just sort of
Yeah, a
checking the
hundred
box
percent.
that you've made FaceTime with this person, and that counts for something. And it's very like you're in the same industry. You have common ground. Like start from that instead of
Yes.
how do I get what you have, or whatever that is. I would also always prefer that someone just tell me what they want. I would
Yeah.
much prefer someone say, "Hey, I'm between jobs and I'm really looking for my next gig and this is what I'm great at," over, "Hey, can we like go to lunch and catch up?"
Yeah.
And then I sit down. You know what I mean? Like, if you're honest with me, I can probably
Yeah.
help you more. But what I don't like is I don't like, the yeah, I don't know. I have a friend that's very he's networky in a way that sort of drives me crazy. I mean, we've been friends for a long time, so I don't think I'm caught up in that with him. But I'll just hear how he talks about it sometimes, and I'm just like, I don't
Gross.
like that. Yeah. And I don't want to be on the receiving end of calls and emails from people that look at it that way.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I think that's one of the things that I always try to stress is that if you are stressed out about networking, you're doing it wrong. Being nervous around people is totally fine. I'm nervous around all kinds of people all the time, but it's not about that. It's really just about making a connection with a person. I can't say it any clearer than that. And people can always feel when you're not being genuine and when you're not being honest, and nobody likes it. Just be real, just be straight up, like M says. That's why I like M, 'cause she's straight up, she's direct. Yeah.
Well, I think the reality, I mean, you were talking about, getting in a room and people are sharing private things sometimes, and there is a lot of personal conversations happening in rooms, and there's a real connection that's happening among a writing staff a lot of times. You come out and you've gone through this experience together. But I've also seen writers that are not sort of authentic through that process, who are very sort of only showing certain sides of themselves. And that's fine. But, the truth is, I might not remember you when it's time to staff a room, not because you weren't a great writer, but because we didn't have any sort of like click, or any sort of
Connection,
connection
real
where, yeah,
connection.
yeah. And I think that's the difference, I think, in this business too than a lot of other businesses, is like you're always at work, even when it feels very personal sometimes, but you have to, yeah, you just have to be genuine. Otherwise, it's just you're just on all the time. And no, going back to writers that I don't want to staff, I don't do well with people that are on all the time.
Yeah, which is, it's very hard to be on all the time. There have been rooms where I had felt like I had to be on all the time, and then I would play into that, and it's exhausting, and I hate it, and it just doesn't
Yeah.
work. So the faster you get real, the better. But once again, no judgment, because I feel like we all kind of gotta learn.
I think it
Um,
took me a while too to realize. I had
yeah,
less in rooms and more like the purpose of like general meetings, and like your agent would send you out on general meetings. I think it
yeah,
it took me a while to be like, oh, I'm just like supposed to like hang out and have a conversation with this person and see if we like click on anything. I think I used to be very much more like goal oriented in these meetings that rarely result in like a tangible win.
absolutely. Um, yeah, general meetings are an interesting animal. After a while, it kind of just has, I have to be very, I have to like psych myself up for them, because I feel like I have to tell my story over and over.
Hmm.
So I got to make my story exciting to myself, or I'll bore myself with this story. Oh my God. Um, but they can be fun, when you meet cool people, because I still meet cool people.
Yeah, and I mean, I have made genuine connections through them over the years that have eventually, led to work or led to specific things. But it's like, it goes back to enjoying the work. It's the same thing. Like you have to enjoy the actual connection and trying to make the actual connection over trying to force what you want the outcome of the connection to be.
For sure. You mentioned something earlier about, kind of the business is weird because it's like all this kind of intermingling, like it's like work, but it's also like friendships. How do you kind of keep your life separate, I guess, when you're such a gangster and a baller in the industry?
I think, well, who can answer that really? Oh God. I think the majority of my friends are not in the industry, and if they are not TV writers. They're in different parts of the industry, or they're not in the industry at all, and they're teachers. So I think that having sort of a well-rounded social life that is not everyone sitting down reloading deadline on their phone all the time, I think is important. Um, my wife is very much not in the industry. So I think I'm not even sure my family understands what I do yet. They ask questions all
Still
the
to this
time, but
day,
they're
nice.
still to this day, I think it's a gray area for them. So I think all of that is helpful. And then I do have my friends in TV that I can sort of sit and bitch with and commiserate about, or, text if we think the Writers Guild is going to strike, and all of that. But it is it's a smaller part of my personal life, I think.
I love it. I try to do the same thing. My partner's also not in the industry. um I think that keeps me really grounded. I feel like once everyone you know is in the industry and talks about it all the time, it creates this false reality where it's all that matters. And I think that that can be very dangerous to everything because I think that you kind of forget that there's a big world out there and that this is still just a job. It still is a job. It's fun. It can be fun. It can be not fun. It ultimately is work, you know, and it's important to
Right, but we're
have
not,
a
at
big
the end of the
life.
day, we're not saving lives or, or going into a coal mine. It is work and it is work for sure, but it is not like the be all end all. And I think, what you're just talking about like letting it become the whole world. That's like what I saw like happening on Twitter at some point. Like you see the same headline on Twitter for so long, and then you like tell somebody off Twitter about this thing, and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But you've convinced yourself for the last hour that it
Exactly
was like
it.
the biggest news story. And I think I
100%.
think the industry is or can be that if you don't have real people around to remind you that at the end of the day you are playing make believe for a living, which I love. And but that is what it is.
I love that. Um, I consider you somewhat of a mentor to me because you've always made yourself available to answer questions. I feel you always, are generous with your time, and I really appreciate that. I wanted to ask you if somebody's looking for a mentor, you know, how do you think it's best to kind of approach that relationship? Or or I guess you could answer, I don't know why do you make yourself available in this way to writers like me? I guess.
Well, I like you, so I,
I
I
love
like
that.
you. I think, you and I have talked about this. There's such this air of mystery around television writing. There was for me when I was trying to get in, and I was just so desperate for somebody to answer all of the questions that I had. And I think I don't know who we're helping by sort of keeping it as a mystery. I think I would love to see more people who don't come from backgrounds where they know how to do this getting a foot in the door. So if I can be helpful, then I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to do it. There were also people who were really helpful to me when I was starting that did answer all of my questions, and I appreciate them. And I think at the end of the day, it's like no one can tell you how to do this because no one is going to get in the same exact way. But I can tell you, 100 things that did or didn't work for me, and I, can answer your sort of specific questions. And I think everyone benefits from information being available. I don't know. I'm wary of people that want to hold on to the secrets of how to break in, and I'm not sure what you're afraid of that you don't want somebody else to have access.
I agree. I'm in the same boat. I think the more people that know, the more we empower other people, the better for everybody. Um, I feel like we're probably winding down soon. I have a couple more questions for you. One question is, if you were reading a script now, because I know you talked about making sure that the characters' voices are clear and separate, and it's clear that, and it's not just one voice. But what else do you kind of look for when you're reading scripts? What else kind of stands out to you?
I think, I multicam is something that I'm really passionate about, so I sort of seek out multicam scripts. So I'll talk about that for a second because I think that's like a really specific um, form. So, and I think when multicam is done well, it's like the story should be as small as possible and not letting the story get in the way of the characters and the jokes and things like that. So I look for people that, if you are writing a multi-script, because I come across those a lot, uh, less regularly than I come across single cam. Then I'm looking to see if you really get the form and you get the way the story should be told in this form. If I'm reading like a single cam, there was this wave of like talking head scripts that went around, after The Office and Parks and Rec that went away for a while that are now back after the success of Abbott. Um, But so if I'm reading those scripts, I'm thinking about, are you doing this format because you really love it and you know how to write for it, or do you think that you're writing like a trendy thing? I think this personally, the story of a pilot is so much less interesting to me than the characters you've built and the world you've built and the jokes and the dialogue. Like of course I want to see that you have some understanding of story structure, but it's so far in the back of my mind when I'm reading a script. I'm really reading for, you know, do your characters talk like people talk, or is it sort of, very stylized? A lot of people try to really stylize their action lines, which is always really distracting for me. I feel like if you're looking at to hire staff writers, you're looking for, is this a person that I could trust to go write a draft with minimal supervision? And I think I don't get that from, highly stylized scripts. I don't know that I always trust that you're somebody that's gonna like go and sort of abide by a show's format. So things like that, if I'm staffing, are usually at what's at the forefront of my brain.
I love that. Have you thought about, this is kind of random, but it's been on my mind. What do you think about ChatGPT and AI, and just your first thoughts as a TV writer about this coming out?
I mean, I'm sure we're gonna see it show up in places that we would rather it didn't. But I think, I don't know. It doesn't like, I know there's a lot of like I've seen a lot of like older writers sort of being freaking out about it. I don't really feel that way. I think at the end of the day, there's like a personal emotion and storytelling that comes down to like something very sort of organically human. But who knows? We could listen to this in 10 years and I'll be everything could be being written by that. But I'm not like, I don't know. I'm sure we'll see somebody figure out how to use it to their advantage to break in as a writer. And I think that will be an
I
interesting
agree.
wave. Yeah,
I agree. I feel like it's just something that we just have to get used to now. I don't know if it's maybe in 5 years or a decade it'll make things look very different, but or at least in the next few years, I feel like it's just something that we're just going to be incorporating into everyday life and we'll just be using as a tool. Um, but I agree, it'll somebody will probably use it to some advantage. And hopefully it's to a writer's advantage and not just to a corporation's advantage. But it feels like a tool of corporations.
probably. But I'll be interested to see if someone, I'm sure someone can swing it their way or find something interesting to do.
I hope so too. So what's next for you?
I just wrapped. I was a writer on season 2 of How I Met Your Father for Hulu, so I just wrapped that. That was my first time back in a room in a while.
Oh, cool.
And
What
then,
level were you for that room? You were on staff?
yeah, I was a consulting producer.
Okay.
I came in 3 episodes into season 2, which was like a 20 episode order, so I was there for quite a bit. But it was fun. It was fun to like be back in the mix, and it was fun to be in the room and not be show running,
Oh,
and
nice.
just
I
sort
was just
of
gonna ask, what was that
just.
like?
It was nice. It was nice. I was like, I'm giving 100%, but I'm going home at 6 o'clock.
I love it.
And that was great. And then I have 2 projects in development that, it's I think we spoke to this earlier, but I do for my brain and for just sort of feeling productive. I am always kind of active on the development front and trying to be active on the development front. So I have 2 projects right now that, um, we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm in the waiting period on both.
Cool. Do you have quotas for yourself in terms of like how many ideas you want to develop a year, or do you just kind of organically just pitch whatever ideas you have?
I think I don't have a quota for myself in sort of any set way. I think I like to have projects at different stages. So the fact that this other piece of development has caught up to where the other one is because the first one took so long is sort of an accident. Usually I like to have, be in script stage on something and be pitching something else. And but that's it. I mean, honestly, depending on how quickly things move or whether or not I'm staffed, there's only so much I can sort of take on bandwidth wise. But I like to have two projects in different stages at least.
Same. I'm a big proponent of having more than one egg in your basket. Just always having multiple things that you're working on. But I love that, Em. It was so great talking to you. As always, you're the
Yeah, this
best. You're
went
such
so
you're a
fast. I was
gangster.
just chatting.
Yeah,
I
we're always chatting. Yeah, that's what we always do. um,
I like it.
you're always so honest. You're the best. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode with M. Dickson. That's all I got for you today. Until next time, homie, get out there, get to work.